Super Pumped, The Battle for Uber, by Mike Isaac. Introduction. It was a cold winter night in Portland, Oregon, in 2014. The city's transportation officers were out on the streets, not to get home, but to catch a criminal. Their target wasn't a bank robber or a jewel thief. It was anyone driving for a fast-growing startup called Uber. For months, the city had been in tense negotiations with the company. Portland, a city that prided itself on being forward-thinking, had even recently created rules to legalize another disruptive startup, Airbnb. They were willing to play ball. But Uber's founder, a man named Travis Kalanick, was done waiting. He believed the entire system, the taxi unions, the city regulations, the politicians, was a corrupt and outdated machine designed to stop innovation. In his eyes, Uber wasn't just an app, it was a revolution. And revolutions don't ask for permission. So that night, Uber launched in Portland illegally. The city's transportation commissioner, a bulldog of a man named Steve Novick, was furious. "Get your fucking company out of our city," he had screamed into the phone at an Uber executive just hours before. He sent his officers out with a clear mission: hail an Uber, and when the driver arrives, hit them with thousands of dollars in fines and threaten to impound their car. One of those officers, Eric England, stood outside a concert hall, posing as a symphony goer needing a ride home. He opened the app and requested a car. A driver accepted. The car was 5 minutes away. And then, it wasn't. The driver canceled. The car on his map simply vanished. He tried again. Same thing. What Officer England didn't know was that he was being watched. He was being hunted by a piece of software. He had been greyballed. Uber had developed a secret tool to identify police officers and regulators, feed them a fake version of the app with ghost cars, and make it impossible for them to catch any drivers. They were fighting a digital war, and the city of Portland had brought a pocket knife to a drone fight. This single night in Portland is a perfect snapshot of the story you're about to hear. It's the story of Uber, but more than that, it's the story of its founder, Travis Kalanick, a brilliant, relentless, and deeply flawed visionary who built one of the most valuable and destructive companies in Silicon Valley history. Mike Isaac's book, Super Pumped, isn't just a business book. It's a modern epic about hubris, ambition, and the wild, unregulated frontier of technology. It sold hundreds of thousands of copies and was turned into a hit TV show because it pulls back the curtain on how a simple idea, tapping a button to get a ride, unleashed a global empire built on a philosophy of winning at all costs. By the end of our time together, you will understand the mindset that allows a founder to believe that breaking the law is not only acceptable but necessary. You'll see how billions of dollars in investment can act like rocket fuel, but also like a poison. And you will learn one of the most powerful and cautionary tales of our time, the story of a man who changed the world, but nearly destroyed himself and his creation in the process. This isn't just about taxis, it's about the very nature of power in the 21st century. Book summary. The story of Uber is, in every meaningful way, the story of Travis Kalanick. To understand the company, its aggression, its brilliance, its toxicity, you have to first understand the man. Travis grew up in Northridge, California, a quiet suburb of Los Angeles. He was the son of a civil engineer father, Donald, a man of logic and systems, and an advertising executive mother, Bonnie, a charmer with a fierce competitive streak. Travis inherited both sides. From his dad, he got a savant-like ability with numbers, able to do complex math in his head. From his mom, he got a relentless drive and a natural gift for sales. As a kid, he was the top seller for his youth troop's pancake breakfast fundraiser. As a teen, he sold $20,000 worth of Cutco knives door-to-door in a single summer. But there was another side to his childhood. In middle school, Travis was bullied relentlessly. He was the geek, the math whiz who wasn't cool. And something in him snapped. He decided he would never be a victim again. He started fighting back, even becoming a bully himself to deflect the attention. He learned a crucial lesson: in a dog-eat-dog world, you either bite or get bitten. This experience forged a siege mentality that would define the rest of his life. He saw enemies everywhere, and believed that survival belonged only to the strong. This mindset followed him to UCLA, where he was studying computer science in the late 90s, right at the dawn of the internet explosion. College campuses had ultra-fast T1 internet connections, and Travis and his friends were obsessed with file sharing, trading music and movies at lightning speed. This led to his first real startup, Scour.net, a search engine for finding and downloading files, a kind of proto-Napster. Travis dropped out of college to work on it full-time, convinced he was on the verge of something huge. And then he learned his second brutal lesson. Scour needed money to grow, and they were introduced to two of the most powerful men in Los Angeles, the billionaire investor Ron Burkle and the legendary Hollywood superagent Michael Ovitz. Ovitz offered them a deal but included a no-shop clause, meaning they couldn't talk to other investors while negotiating. Then, Ovitz dragged his feet. With the company running out of cash, Kalanick told Ovitz they had to look for money elsewhere. 3 days later, Ovitz sued them for breaking the no-shop clause. Kalanick was cornered and livid. To save the company, he had to accept Ovitz's brutal terms, giving the agent more than half of the company for a fraction of its worth. It was a masterclass in power dynamics. But the betrayal wasn't over. The movie and recording industries sued Scour for $250 billion for copyright infringement. Ovitz, seeing the writing on the wall, publicly distanced himself from the company and tried to sell his stake, leaving Kalanick and his co-founders to face the wolves alone. The company went bankrupt. Travis was devastated, depressed, sleeping 15 hours a day. He had poured his entire life into Scour, only to be betrayed and crushed by a powerful investor. Right then and there, he swore an oath to himself. He would never, ever let an investor have that kind of power over him again. He would never trust a venture capitalist. As he would later say, channeling the West Coast rappers of his youth, VCs ain't shit but hoss and tricks. These two formative experiences, being the bullied kid who fought back and the young founder crushed by a ruthless investor, created the man who would one day build Uber. He was a pit bull that had been kicked its whole life. No matter how many times he was beaten down, he just kept getting back up, angrier and more determined than before. After the dot-com bubble burst, Travis entered a period he called his post-pop depression. He started a second company, Red Swoosh, a revenge business that used the same file-sharing technology as Scour but sold it legally to the very media companies that had sued him. For 6 years, he hustled relentlessly, going months without pay, living with his parents, and fighting to keep the company alive in the nuclear winter of the post-dot-com world. It taught him how to negotiate from a position of weakness. Finally, in 2007, he sold Red Swoosh to a larger company for nearly $20 million, personally netting about $2 million after taxes. For the first time in his adult life, Travis Kalanick was a success. He was a millionaire. He bought a condo on a hill in San Francisco and started life as an angel investor, calling himself the Wolf, a fixer who swooped in to help other young founders. He even started a social club in his sparsely furnished apartment, calling it the Jam Pad, where entrepreneurs could come to jam on new ideas. And it was at the Jam Pad that the idea for Uber was born. The idea didn't come from Travis, though. It came from another young, successful entrepreneur named Garrett Camp. Camp had just sold his own startup, StumbleUpon, for $75 million and was living the good life in San Francisco. But one thing drove him crazy. he could never, ever get a taxi. The system was ancient and unreliable. He'd call multiple taxi companies, take the first one that showed up, and ghost the rest. Eventually, the taxi companies blacklisted him. He was vexed. Here he was, a millionaire in one of the most technologically advanced cities in the world, and he couldn't get a simple ride across town. Then, in 2007, something happened that would change everything. Steve Jobs unveiled the iPhone. The iPhone wasn't just a phone, it was a powerful computer in everyone's pocket, complete with GPS. One night, watching the James Bond movie Casino Royale, Camp saw Bond track his own car on a map on his phone. A light bulb went off. What if you could press a button and a car would just show up? What if you could watch it coming to you on a map, just like James Bond? He would call it Uber Cab. Camp became obsessed with the idea. He talked about it incessantly to everyone at the jam pad, especially to Travis. The vision was simple and elegant, an exclusive, high-end black car service for professionals like them. Mercedes, BMWs, Lincolns. Everyone's private driver. At worst, he figured, he'd create a convenient service for himself and his friends. At best, it could be a multi-billion-dollar company. Initially, neither Camp nor Kalanick wanted to run it. They were enjoying their post-startup freedom. But Camp was persistent. After a series of drunken nights in Paris crunching numbers on napkins, he finally wore Kalanick down. They knew this idea would mean a fight, a war against the entrenched taxi industry. It needed a fighter to lead it. And they both knew Travis Kalanick was the right man for the job. But being the right man doesn't make the job easy. In its earliest days, Uber wasn't an app, it was a website where you could request a car. And neither Kalanick nor Camp wanted to be the full-time CEO. So, in a move that would become Silicon Valley legend, Kalanick tweeted out a job opening, looking for entrepreneurial product MGR/biz dev killer. Big equity, big peeps involved. A 26-year-old intern in Chicago named Ryan Graves saw the tweet and replied, "Here's a tip. Email me." That cheeky reply would eventually make him a billionaire. Graves was hired as Uber's first employee, and for a short time, its first CEO. He was a hard worker, a good dude, but he wasn't a visionary CEO. Investors were interested in the idea of Uber, but they weren't sold on Graves leading it. It quickly became clear that only one person had the killer instinct to make Uber a reality. Kalanick stepped in as the permanent CEO. But true to his oath, he did it on his terms. He demanded a larger ownership stake and majority control, ensuring no investor could ever pull a Michael Ovitz on him again. He didn't care about the salary. He cared about power. With Kalanick at the helm, the company, now just called Uber, exploded. The early vision was all about luxury and exclusivity. They handed out free iPhones to limo drivers to get them on the network. They gave out promotional gift cards to the tech elite in San Francisco, turning the app into a status symbol. The experience was designed to be frictionless. You could see your car coming, the cars were clean, and payment happened automatically. No fumbling for cash, no tips. You just got out of the car. It felt like magic. Word spread like wildfire. Uber was exactly what San Franciscans had been waiting for. But to truly scale, they needed a playbook. That job fell to Austin Geit, an early intern who had been turned down for a barista job the same day she was hired at Uber. She became Uber's first city launcher, parachuting into new markets like Seattle, Chicago, and New York, and systematically building the service from the ground up. The playbook was brilliant in its simplicity. Find local limo companies with cars sitting idle, give their drivers a free iPhone with the app, and offer them a way to make extra money during their downtime. To kickstart the market, Uber would burn through venture capital money, offering free rides to passengers and huge cash bonuses to drivers. It was a classic chicken and egg problem, and as one early manager put it, Uber solved that problem by straight up buying the chicken. The strategy was expensive, but it worked. Uber would barge into a new city, often illegally, and grow so popular with citizens so quickly that by the time regulators even knew what was happening, it was too late to shut them down. This approach became one of Kalanick's core values: principled confrontation. He believed the taxi industry was a corrupt cartel protected by outdated laws, and that Uber had a moral obligation to fight it for the good of the customer. "If you ask for permission up front for something that's already legal," he once said, "you'll never get it." But the real explosion didn't happen with black cars. It happened when Uber copied an idea from its smaller, friendlier rival, Lyft. Lyft pioneered the idea of peer-to-peer ride-sharing, allowing everyday people to use their own cars to give rides. Their cars were adorned with giant, fluffy pink mustaches, and they promoted a friendly, ride-in-the-front-seat vibe. Kalanick was initially nervous about the idea. Uber's drivers were all licensed professionals. Lyft was letting anyone with a driver's license get behind the wheel. But when he saw how popular Lyft was becoming, he knew he had to compete. Uber launched its own low-cost version, UberX, and the war began. For Kalanick, this was a zero-sum game. There wasn't room for two winners. He wanted nothing less than the complete obliteration of his opponent. Uber played dirty. They booked thousands of fake Lyft rides and then canceled them. They sent employees to Lyft's driver recruitment events to poach their drivers. They bought billboards all over San Francisco with a giant black razor blade poised to cut off one of Lyft's pink mustaches, with the words, "Shave the stash." To fund this war, Kalanick needed a massive war chest. This is where he and his new right-hand man, Emil Michael, truly shined. Michael was a master dealmaker, the smooth closer to Kalanick's fiery showmanship. Together, they perfected what they called the home show. Instead of traveling to pitch investors, they made the world's biggest investment firms come to them, jockeying for one of just 3 meeting slots per day. Kalanick would put on a dazzling performance, presenting a slide deck filled with hockey stick growth curves that made investors' eyes light up. He positioned Uber alongside world-changing companies like Apple and Google, and himself among legendary founders like Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg. Then, Michael would swoop in to close the deal, making the investors sweat and playing them off one another to get the best terms. They raised billions. And with every new round of funding, Kalanick consolidated his power, demanding super voting shares and stripping investors of their information rights. He would never be at the mercy of his money men again. This all came to a head in 2015, at the height of Uber's power and arrogance. To celebrate hitting a major revenue milestone, Kalanick flew nearly 5,000 employees to Las Vegas for a week-long party they called X to the X. The entire ordeal cost over $25 million. They rented out entire clubs, managers did drugs with their subordinates, and one employee even stole a party shuttle for a joyride. The grand finale was a private concert by one of the biggest stars on the planet, Beyoncé. Kalanick paid her $6 million in Uber stock for the performance. A clearly drunk Kalanick stumbled on stage at the end, holding Beyoncé's hand and yelling into the microphone, "I fucking love you. All of you." This was the peak. The moment when Uber employees, many of them nerds in high school, felt like they were the kings of the world. It was also at this party that Kalanick unveiled his 14 company values, the commandments that guided his corporate empire. They read like a bro-speak translation of Amazon's leadership principles. Things like always be hustlin', meritocracy and toe-stepping, and, most famously, super pumped. To be super pumped was to have a do-whatever-it-takes attitude. to work insane hours, and to move the company forward at all costs. It was the single most important quality Kalanick looked for in a new recruit. But even at this moment of triumph, there were signs of trouble. During a Conda session, one of Uber's most important investors, Bill Gurley, gave Kalanick some advice. He said Kalanick's intensity was a great strength, but also a great weakness. He pushed his employees so hard they were smashing their heads through the ceiling. He suggested Kalanick should help his employees take better care of themselves, maybe even try yoga. Kalanick smirked and mockingly dropped into a child's pose on stage. The message was clear: Uber wouldn't be resting. This culture of winning at all costs created an environment that one employee described as an admixture of Thomas Hobbes, Animal House, and the Wolf of Wall Street. It was a place where bullying managers were seen as high performers and protected by a non-existent HR department. The New York office, led by a pugnacious general manager named Josh Moorer, was infamous for its bro culture and aggression. In other global offices, managers threw coffee mugs at subordinates and threatened them with baseball bats. The company's ethics were just as questionable. They created secret programs to spy on competitors. A program codenamed Hell was designed to track the location of every Lyft driver in real time, allowing Uber to lure them away with better incentives. A more clandestine unit, the Strategic Services Group, made up of ex-CIA and FBI operatives, conducted corporate espionage, impersonating drivers and riders to gather intelligence, and even physically surveilling rival executives. Nowhere was this war more brutal than in China. Kalanick was obsessed with conquering the Chinese market, a feat no American tech CEO had ever accomplished. He poured billions of dollars into a subsidy war against the local ride-hailing giant, Didi Chuxing. At its peak, Uber was losing $50 million a week in China, much of it to sophisticated fraud schemes where drivers and riders colluded to create fake trips and collect bonuses. The anti-fraud team back in San Francisco watched on their screens as digital centipedes, a single driver's car followed by a dozen fake passenger accounts, scuttled across the maps of Chinese cities, getting fat on Uber's money. To fight this fraud, Uber's engineers developed a tool that secretly fingerprinted every iPhone that used the app, a blatant violation of Apple's privacy rules. To hide it from Apple's reviewers, they created a geofence around Apple's headquarters in Cupertino. If the app was opened near Apple, the secret code wouldn't run. Eventually, an Apple reviewer outside of California discovered the deception. Apple's CEO, Tim Cook, was furious. He summoned Kalanick to his office. He knew that being kicked off the App Store would be a death sentence for Uber. Kalanick, for one of the few times in his life, humbled himself and promised it would never happen again. He had survived a showdown with Tim Cook. As his fear melted away, it was replaced by a renewed sense of invincibility. If he could take on Apple, he could take on anyone. This feeling would not last long. The year 2017 would become one of the worst periods of sustained crisis for any corporation in the history of Silicon Valley. It was a storm of self-inflicted wounds, and it all began with a hashtag. In January 2017, when President Trump announced his travel ban on several Muslim-majority countries, protesters flocked to airports across the nation. In New York, the Taxi Workers Union, largely composed of Muslim drivers, announced a one-hour strike at JFK Airport in solidarity. At the same time, Uber's New York office, trying to avoid accusations of price gouging, tweeted that it was turning off its surge pricing at the airport. To the public, the timing looked terrible. It appeared as though Uber was trying to break the strike and profit from the protests. A Chicago tech worker with the Twitter handle @bro_pair saw the tweet and snapped. He tweeted out an idea for a hashtag, delete Uber. It exploded. The hashtag became a rallying cry not just against Uber's actions that day, but against everything the company had come to represent. Its perceived collusion with the Trump administration. Kalanick was on Trump's Business Advisory Council, its ruthless anti-labor policies, and the arrogant tech bro culture it embodied. In 1 week, more than 500,000 people permanently deleted their accounts. Lyft, which had been on the verge of failure, saw a massive surge in users and was able to raise a new round of funding, saving it from extinction. Under immense pressure from the public and his own employees, Kalanick was forced to resign from Trump's advisory council. It was the first major crack in the armor. But it was just the beginning. On Sunday, February 19, 2017, a 24-year-old former Uber engineer named Susan Fowler published a blog post titled "Reflecting on One Very, Very Strange Year at Uber." In nearly 3,000 words, she detailed a culture of systemic sexual harassment and a human resources department that actively protected high-performing male offenders. On her very first day on her new team, her manager had propositioned her for sex over the company chat. When she reported him to HR, she was told that since he was a high performer, they would only give him a warning, and that she could either stay on his team and risk a bad performance review, or find a new team. Fowler's post went nuclear. It was the match that lit the fuse. The story was so damning because it confirmed everything the public already suspected about Uber's toxic, misogynistic culture. Kalanick, seeing the internal revolt, moved quickly. He announced an independent investigation to be led by Eric Holder, the former U.S. Attorney General under Barack Obama. Just 4 days later, another bombshell. Google's self-driving car division, now called Waymo, filed a massive lawsuit against Uber, accusing them of stealing their trade secrets. The suit alleged that Anthony Levandowski, the star engineer Kalanick had poached from Google to lead Uber's self-driving division, had downloaded 14,000 confidential files before he left. It was a calculated theft, Waymo claimed, that netted auto employees over $500 million and allowed Uber to revive a stalled program. Then, at the end of February, the ugliest blow of all. Bloomberg News released a dashcam video. It showed Travis Kalanick in the back of an Uber, arguing with his driver, Fauzi Kamal, over falling fares. "I lost $97,000 because of you," the driver tells him. "I'm bankrupt because of you." Kalanick's response is brutal. "Some people don't like to take responsibility for their own shit," he screams into the driver's face before slamming the door. "They blame everything in their life on somebody else. Good luck." The video was a public relations apocalypse. This wasn't a rumor or an anonymous source. This was Travis Kalanick, in his own words, revealing the contempt he seemed to have for the very drivers his empire was built on. When his top executive saw the video, Kalanick collapsed onto the floor, writhing and muttering, "This is bad. What is wrong with me?" He was forced to issue a profound public apology, admitting for the first time that he needed leadership help and had to grow up. The company was in a freefall. High-level executives started resigning. The press uncovered the existence of the Greyball program, leading to a federal criminal investigation. The story about the executive's trip to a South Korean escort karaoke bar came out. It was a new disaster every week. The final, fatal error was a personal tragedy. In late May, Kalanick's parents were in a horrific boating accident. His mother, Bonnie, was killed instantly. His father, Donald, was critically injured. Travis was devastated. In the middle of his grief, the investors made their move. The group of early investors who had once championed Kalanick, led by Bill Gurley of Benchmark Capital, had had enough. They had watched for months as the company they had poured millions into was being torn apart by the scandals of its founder. Gurley, who had once been Kalanick's biggest supporter, now saw him as a liability that had to be removed. On Tuesday, June 20, 2017, Two of Gurley's partners from Benchmark flew to Chicago, where Kalanick was interviewing a potential COO. They walked into his hotel room at the Ritz-Carlton and handed him a letter signed by 5 of Uber's major investors. The title of the letter was Moving Uber Forward. Its first demand was simple and brutal: you must immediately and permanently resign as CEO. Kalanick was stunned, then furious. He paced and shouted. He felt betrayed. How could they do this to him, just weeks after his mother's death? But the investors, who called themselves the syndicate, had him boxed in. They gave him a deadline: resign by the end of the day, or they would take the fight public, plastering the letter on the front page of the New York Times. Kalanick spent the day frantically calling allies, trying to rally support, but his power base had eroded. He was exhausted from the scandals, shattered by his mother's death. For the first time in his life, he was tired of fighting. Late that night, he agreed to their terms. He signed the resignation letter. Travis Kalanick, the founder and builder of Uber, was no longer its chief executive. The venture capitalists had won their revenge. In the chaotic search for a new CEO, the board ultimately landed on Dara Khosrowshahi, the respected and level-headed CEO of Expedia. He was the anti-Travis: calm, empathetic, and boring. He was dubbed the new dad of Silicon Valley. Khosrowshahi's first mission was to undo everything Kalanick had stood for. He threw out the 14 company values and replaced them with a new mantra: we do the right thing. Period. He settled the Waymo lawsuit, sold off money-losing international businesses, and launched a $500 million ad campaign to repair the company's battered image. But the final severing of Kalanick from his creation came with what Bill Gurley called the grand bargain. The Japanese conglomerate SoftBank invested billions into Uber, but on one condition: the company's governance had to be completely restructured. Kalanick's supervoting shares were converted to one share, one vote, effectively stripping him of his iron grip on the company. The deal was signed in December 2017. Gurley had finally won. Kalanick had finally lost. In May 2019, Uber finally went public. Kalanick was present for the bell ringing, but was asked not to stand on the balcony with the new leadership team. In a moment of supreme irony for a company built on explosive growth, Uber's IPO was a disaster. The stock opened below its initial price, one of the worst first-day performances for a major American IPO in history. The king of the unicorns had been tamed by the harsh realities of the public market. Commentary. The story of Super Pumped is more than just the chronicle of a company. It's a profound and sometimes uncomfortable look into the nature of ambition in our modern world. When you strip away the billions of dollars, the celebrity parties, and the corporate espionage, you're left with a timeless question: how far is too far in the pursuit of a world-changing idea? Travis Kalanick wasn't just building a company, he was waging a war. He saw himself as a revolutionary, a trust-buster fighting a corrupt taxi cartel. And in many ways, he was right. The old taxi system was inefficient, outdated, and often terrible for customers. Uber, at its best, was a magical solution. It was a testament to the idea that a single person with a bold vision and an unrelenting will can genuinely change the daily lives of millions of people. That part of the story is deeply inspiring. It's the story we tell ourselves about innovation. But the book forces us to look at the dark side of that same coin. The very qualities that made Kalanick a brilliant founder, his aggression, his principled confrontation, his willingness to break the rules, were the same qualities that led to the company's toxic culture and its near self-destruction. The line between being a disruptor and being a bully, between being super pumped and being reckless, became hopelessly blurred. One of the most powerful lessons from this story is about the cult of the founder. For years, Silicon Valley worshipped founders like gods. They were the visionaries, the philosopher kings who could see the future. Investors gave them unchecked power, billions of dollars, and a free pass to move fast and break things. Uber is the ultimate cautionary tale of what happens when that worship goes too far. When you remove all checks and balances, when you tell a founder that winning is the only thing that matters, you create a monster. The investors who enabled Kalanick's rise were the same ones who ultimately had to stage a coup to take him down. They lit the fire, and then were shocked when the whole house started to burn. For anyone with a dream, for anyone trying to build something of their own, this book serves as a critical moral compass. It asks you to define your own values before the world defines them for you. What does winning really mean to you? Is it just about market share and valuation, or is it also about the culture you create, the people you empower, and the legacy you leave behind? Kalanick's 14 values were plastered on the walls of Uber's offices, but the unwritten value, the one that truly mattered, was win at all costs. And the cost, in the end, was nearly everything. Perhaps the most practical takeaway is a simple one. Culture isn't what you write on a poster, it's what you reward and what you punish. At Uber, high performers who were bullies or harassers were protected because they delivered growth. That single decision, repeated over and over, created a system where the worst behavior was not only tolerated but implicitly encouraged. If you're leading a team, a project, or even just your own life, ask yourself, what behavior am I truly rewarding? The answer to that question will define your culture more than any mission statement ever could. That was a summary of Super Pumped by Mike Isaac. We certainly touched on the major battles and betrayals today, but I'll be honest with you, a summary can only ever give you a bird's-eye view. The real power of this story is in the details, in the moment-to-moment decisions and the human drama that a brief overview can't fully capture. This summary is designed to help you decide if this book is worth your time. If the epic rise and fall of this modern empire has sparked something in you, I truly encourage you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning business history, it's an experience that will make you think deeply about the world we live in and the price of progress. A link to the book is in the description. Also, if you found this journey valuable, please show your support by hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. That way, you won't miss our next exploration into another life-changing book from the billionaire's bookshelf. Let's keep learning and growing together.